Bantamweight in 2020 is straight fire. We've got another great fight coming up. We have the Magic Man himself, Marlon Moraes, taking on New England's own Rob Font. And Matt, for the New England Cartel under Tyson Chartier, it's been a wild year. I mean, Calvin Kattar's booked to fight Max Holloway. Rob Font has a fight against Marlon Moraes. Things are really looking up for the guys kind of training in and around Lausanne's MMA. And for Rob Font, it's been a minute. It really has. And I mean, if you look at his run in the UFC since he joined back in 2014, a winning record so far, some big highlight reel wins over Matt Schnell, my guy D Silva, Douglas Silva de Andrade, a win over Thomas Almeida by finish, and then his last two fights over Sergio Pettis and Ricky Simon. And Matt, Sergio Pettis is that hot new thing at 135 pounds over in Bellator. And I might embellish that because I'm a Bellator guy, but no, go watch Sergio Pettis in Bellator. It's actually a lot of fun. And the win over Ricky Simon was one of those ones where you're taking on a really tough out. I know he wasn't against Uriah Faber, but that's definitely a feather to have in your cap. I think it's maybe less of a win than a win over Sergio Pettis, but Pettis was coming up from 25 to take that fight. But I digress. Rob Font, 2-fight win streak. It's been over a year since we saw him last. I'm pretty sure I saw him. I'm going to have to go back through my phone at the last NEF event I was at back in February, where Manny Bermudez took on Bruce Boynton. But in this fight, man, if you're Rob Font, it's a pretty good matchup for you, eh? Like, it's pretty good that you got a name like this, Marlon Moraes, to have that long of a layoff, and then here you go, Marlon Moraes.
Oh, 100%. And with Rob Font, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get an exciting fight when he is involved. Some of the better pure boxing you will see in all of MMA. I know it's kind of a staple of the gym when you talk about guys like him and Calvin Kattar. Phenomenal boxing, and not just phenomenal boxing, phenomenal MMA boxing. I do think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. You can be really good at boxing, and then you come into MMA, you have to defend takedowns and kicks and leg kicks and all that. Rob Font has a really good game to incorporate over into MMA. He does check kicks quite well for a boxer. It is a little odd. I do agree with you. This is a good matchup name-wise. This is a very poor matchup style-wise for Rob Font. And again, Rob Font, he has fun fights. He's taken quite a while off, which is a little concerning. And when you talk about his last two wins, beating Sergio Pettis in the way that he did was really impressive. He was able to really just stick behind the jab for the majority of that fight. And it was a really disciplined fight out of Rob Font. He never started throwing wild, thinking that he could get Sergio Pettis out of there at any point. He was really disciplined. It is odd, though, when you start looking at Rob Font, and some of the guys have a power advantage over him. We go back to the Pedro Munoz fight. Rob Font was hyped up a lot before that Pedro Munoz fight. And of course, Pedro Munoz is one of the top guys at 135, so losing to him, there's no shame in that. But Pedro rocks him on the feet and then is able to submit him. And it's been something that is a little concerning about Rob Font. Not that he gets finished all that often, but when you do hit him clean, he does get dropped. John Lineker was able to knock him down. Pedro Munoz hurt him. Rafael Assunção hurt him. Those are three of the more heavy-handed guys until you get to Assunção. Assunção is not a guy who's known for his power punching by any means. He's a very technical striker, and anyone could get caught. But it does worry me a little bit about Rob Font coming into this fight. And again, I'm going to say the exact same thing about Marlon. Marlon's coming into this on less than 2 months off of his last fight against Corey Sandhagen, where he didn't only just get beat, he got beat bad. And Corey Sandhagen was just giving him a lot to think about throughout that fight. He was throwing high kicks, body kicks, low kicks, really mixing in his boxing well and his footwork. The good news for Marlon is he's fighting a much more stationary target in this fight. Corey Sandhagen, again, I made the reference of Ayman Zahabi fights like he's playing Dance Dance Revolution. Corey Sandhagen's beaten that game already. He's moved on to whatever's next. He's like one of those guys you see at your local movie theater, and he's practicing for hours every single day when you're walking around the mall. That's how Corey Sandhagen fights. Rob Font is a little bit more stationary. He does sort of throw big looping shots sometimes, but he knows he gets a guy hurt. And I do think it really comes down to who's the more durable guy at this stage in their career, because I would argue Marlon traditionally has been. He can normally eat big shots, but you look at the Henry Cejudo fight, he's beating the brakes off Henry Cejudo. The fight's not even competitive. And then Henry just keeps on working his way back into the fight. He never goes away. And he is able to overwhelm Marlon throughout that fight. And then, of course, in the third round, just beats him really, really badly. And with the Corey Sandhagen fight, he's given Marlon a lot to think about, and he was able to check a lot of Marlon's kicks, which I do think was a big factor in that fight. I don't know if Rob Font can fight in that manner, though. I think this is your fight of the night. I think it's the most exciting fight on the card by far. I'm really curious to get your thoughts, because really, I'm having a hard time predicting this one.
I mean, to me, I look at it, and I want to talk about the Topology picks, because I know, Matt, when we brought this up, it was a huge shock to both of us. 763 total votes, 86% Moraes, And 48% of fans picking him to win by knockout. For Font, the 14% that picked him, 53% by decision, 35% by knockout. And if we look at the odds, Marlon Moraes, the slight favorite, open to -175. He's now at a -150. For Rob Font, open to +150, now at a +125. So the money is coming in on Rob Font. And Matt, originally I thought, Rob Font with the layoff, he's on a 2-fight win streak. The Sergio Pettis win, he looked amazing. But Pettis was coming up from 125, like on short notice. It was a weird fight. I remember the promo packs. Rob Font run around his neighborhood, and it was cold. Rob Font runs. He's in the Northeast. We're more Northeast than that. It's cold. It's getting cold now. It's starting to snow. And then you look at the last fight that he had against Ricky Simon. That's a good win, but it was a year ago. For Marlon Moraes, you look at the losses. Okay, let's look at the wins. Jimmy Rivera, where he silenced Utica, New York. Rafael Sunsao, where he submitted him, which is the comeback fight. That was a revenge fight because he had lost to a Sunsao earlier on. Again, former common opponent between these two guys.
And he didn't just submit him. He dropped him twice and then submitted him. It was a very dominant performance.
Loses to Cejudo, where he kind of gave up, and Mark Henry was telling him to win it for his family and such.
Yeah, that was weird.
You don't like to see that. But again, I hate this narrative in MMA. I hate this narrative in combat sports. If I've seen a guy quit, well, then he's going to quit. It's the Charles Oliveira thing. Did you watch Charles Oliveira in his win streak? Did you watch him fight Tony Ferguson? I don't like that narrative that people build up in sports. I think it's silly. Marlon gave up in that fight. Then he comes back and fights Jose Aldo. And when watching that fight, I had scored it for Marlon. I know a lot of people scored it for Jose. You scored it for Jose. Well, that's fine.
It was close, though. It was a coin flip.
I'll keep you around. I thought the Marlon won it, but still. Did it warrant a title shot? Maybe not. But I don't think it warranted one for Jose Aldo either. And then in Marlon's last fight against Sandhagen, it was like, well, Sandhagen's a grappler. He's a wonky striker.
I don't think I'd call Corey Sandhagen a grappler.
Holy Lord. I mean, look at Corey Sandhagen. Wow. So it was a huge knockout win for Sandhagen. I think bigger and better things are to come after Aljamain Knockwood fights Piotr Jan. But for Marlon, it leaves him in a weird spot. Do you give him a top 5 guy, or do you just kind of reach and give him a guy like Rob Font? Rob Font, obviously, like I said to start the video, this is a perfect fight for him to take on a guy like Marlon. I feel like complete game, the edge goes to Marlon Moraes. I mean, he throws a lot of kicks. He throws them high, he throws them low. He mixes them in very well. His wrestling's good. He does kind of fade in some fights, but I don't really worry about him in this one against a guy like Rob Font. However, Font is a guy that stays on his bike, so you might have to worry about that. And this is a layoff where he's 33. So you're still kind of in the physical prime. I just don't love that layoff. It's kind of a weird one. And I know if you go and you look it up on Tapology, he had fights that fell through before the one against Ricky Simon, but there hasn't really been a whole lot of rumblings. So where has he been?
I wish I knew. So Marlon does a lot of things that I like in this fight, and the thing that you have to do to beat a guy like Marlon Moraes, it was the only really commonality between the Cejudo fight and the Sandhagen fight. If you can eliminate Marlon's kicks, it really diminishes his game plan. He does have really good hands. He's an extremely heavy-handed fighter, but he doesn't have the technique in his pure boxing that he does in his kickboxing, and it really is important for Marlon to incorporate the kicks into his stand-up, because when he is throwing his combinations, just look at the first half of the Henry Cejudo fight, because they are a tale of two completely different fights. The first half of it is Marlon Moraes basically just teeing off on a heavy bag, and he's throwing heavy low kicks, body kicks, head kicks, really mixing it up well. But when Henry Cejudo closed the distance and was able to just eliminate basically the bottom half of Marlon, he had great success, and that's what Corey Sandhagen did, but he did it in a very different way. Corey Sandhagen, the much bigger, rangier fighter, he was able to use his own kicks to keep Marlon at such a far range that Marlon could never really get on the inside of him. Rob Font doesn't really have either one of those tools, and that concerns me in this fight. He's not a rangy enough guy that he can use his own kicks, because really, Rob Font's not going to throw a ton of kicks at you. He's a primary boxer when it comes to his stand-up, and he's not going to go out there and really put on a dominant wrestling performance like a Henry Cejudo is able to do. So the question comes down to, can Rob Font outbox a kickboxer in Marlon Moraes? And I just don't see it happening.
Or does Marlon Moraes come into this fight incredibly tentative, stay on his back foot, and try and hit some of those kicks in there, and Rob Font crashes distance? I think that if Rob Font's going to get the win, he's A, got to hope for that, but B, just utilize that forward pressure, really press Marlon. And I know if Marlon loses, it's probably going to be Marlon crashing in more than anything. But for Rob Font, if he's able to kind of close that distance, really get in tight, really work his just top-heavy boxing control game, that would be a win for Rob Font. For Marlon, though, Swiss Army knife, a lot of different paths to victory. And again, in MMA, usually the kickboxer beats the boxer.
100%. Again, the leg kicks against a boxer are one of the most important things going, because if you can eliminate that front leg of Rob Font, he can't put any pressure on it to then throw his power shots of his own. And even if Marlon is tentative in this fight, being tentative is going to help you land those kicks from the outside. I really don't see... Again, I know the odds are close. Rob Font has more than a puncher's chance. He is a phenomenal boxer, and we don't really know where Marlon is at this stage in his career. It's just really hard for me to pick against the more complete guy in Marlon in this fight.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We're both going with Marlon Moraes to get the win, and I'm excited to see what people are going to have down in the comments section below. Let us know who you think is going to win, because, and I know I say this for certain fights and people scoff at it, but Font, at 14% of fans picking him and just a slight underdog, he is less than a hipster's pick. I think he has a very good opportunity in this fight, so I'll be eager to see what happens in this one. We have it as one of our possible fight of the night contenders. So check out that playlist over there. 15 total fights on this card. You're not going to want to miss any of it, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it.